are found.
Hello everyone and welcome back yet again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We are in the home stretch of today's show, our final two segments, our final divisional betting preview of the day and unfortunately of the week, because this is the last NFL division we are going to be profiling here, the AFC West, and we're going to bring up some graphics for this one yesterday. For some reason they didn't work, but I've got them primed and ready to go for you today. Let's talk about the AFC West for a hot minute, because as you can see right here, it's the Chiefs and mainly everyone else. Because think about how the AFC West profiles. Yes, the Chargers have Jim Harbaugh now, and his whole philosophy of how he might get Justin Herbert to play within his system, and the running game is going to be good. But it's always going to be the Chiefs. The Chiefs are the story. They, out of all the teams in history, look most primed to repeat. I read an interesting article in SI about all these teams and all the mentalities going into that season if they were trying to three-peat. I know we're talking about the Steelers, the Cowboys in the 90s, they were trying to three-peat, and all those different narratives. But the Chiefs certainly seem like a team that, A, actually seems to be going under the radar in terms of the hype they've been receiving, and B, they just have the mentality to do it, and they have perhaps one of the best QBs in NFL history at the helm, and it's Patrick Mahomes. And if you have Patrick Mahomes, and as long as Travis Kelce, even as he's aging, is a fantastic tight end, I still think he is. I think the Chiefs are just fine, unless we can see this graphic here, to win 11.5 games at minus 112. I'm taking that bet every day of the week. I truly believe that the Chiefs are still a team to beat. I like the additions of Marquise Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy from Texas as well, another Texas boy. But I think the problem that they could face, right, is much like last year's, except I truly believe, as Tap to Learn gives me another question to really hammer home the point I'm trying to make with the Chiefs receiver room. What do you think of the Chiefs receiver room? Does Worthy make a difference? I really do think highly of this Chiefs receiver room. And Worthy does make a difference. Watching him as a Texas fan in college, he's not just someone who's a speedster, right? That's everyone's worry when you have a guy who's really speedy. Of course, we're talking about guys who have set the standard in terms of the 40-yard dash, not translating to the NFL. I think Worthy, if you see him on tape, he's a fantastic route runner as well, and he adds that versatility to this offense. He can kind of be like a gadget guy in this system. He can go on reverses and jet sweeps. He can go vertical too. He has that in him. He can return punts as well and return kickoffs now with the new kickoffs rules. He brings so much versatility to this team. And then if you add Marquise Hollywood Brown, who's always been a deep threat, and if Travis Kelce can just be the guy who breaks down defenses with his high IQ, I really think this team is cemented. The problem with the Chiefs receiver room is, in fact, something as Tap to Learn says again, Chiefs playing NFC South 4 wins right there. That's going to be a very interesting narrative. I think that you might get a tough game out of the Falcons, but yeah, I think that you are correct in your sentiment there. But that being said, the Chiefs wide receiver room is one that I'm going to keep a close eye on, mainly due to not just internal but external issues as well. Can this team truly buy into the fact that, hey, a three-peat is bigger than ourselves, and we want to do this? We have the QB. We need to step up and really translate to our on-the-field play. And if they can do that, then this team is special. Obviously, you had concerns last year with drops as well. Xavier Worthy, I know, has some concerns with drops in his college career, but he did shore them up last year. So if everything falls right, the Chiefs should be primed to at least get to the Super Bowl, if not win it in three-peat. But let's talk about the rest of this division, because we have to, because even though it seems like a runaway for the Chiefs, let's talk about the other teams in this division. Let's talk about the Los Angeles Chargers, perhaps the biggest threat, quote-unquote, to the Chiefs dynasty right here. But when I think about the Los Angeles Chargers, right, you have to think that Jim Harbaugh's system will take a while to set in, especially for a young gunslinging quarterback like Justin Herbert, who wants to get the football on the field. But this year, you'll see glimpses of it. And even though I have them missing the playoffs at minus 120, I think that there will be glimpses of what Jim Harbaugh wants to implement in the system, because right now you don't necessarily have the wide receivers to allow Justin Herbert to go down the field vertically every once in a while. I think that Joshua Palmer is an interesting receiver, but he's not a wide receiver one. Then you add Lai McConkey to the draft, fantastic at Georgia in terms of his high IQ and intelligence, but how he translates to the NFL will be very intriguing to see. And then Quentin Johnson out of TCU last year, really hugely disappointing in terms of his year last year, not cementing himself as someone who we can rely upon. And then you lose Keenan Allen, no matter how old he is, was still one of the more valuable wide receivers in the league. I think that now is the time for the Chargers to implement that. And I don't think it will immediately lead to their success, but I still believe that, like I said, Jim Harbaugh will have a lot of implementation in place. I like them bringing in Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, becoming more of a committee running back room to mitigate for the loss of Austin Eckler. I think that that approach will really help Justin Herbert understand his new role in this offense, that he's not going to be the downfield guy that people expect out of him. So that whole narrative is going to be one of the positives, but the negative is I still think they're not necessarily ready for the playoffs. I still think they're trying to shake the Brandon Staley culture from their minds. It will still kind of dwell on them a little bit in this transition, and that's why I think that this whole narrative shift will take a little while to process for them. Let's go to another intriguing team here who might be decent in a couple years, but right now feels like they're a little behind the eight ball in terms of the rebuild, although they have a new rejuvenation in terms of their head coach. I really think that the Las Vegas Raiders are a team we're a couple years away. I think that if you look at what Antonio Pierce did just by replacing Josh McDaniels, that's a fantastically positive start, because Josh McDaniels was part of the frustration there, right? He was a coach who didn't necessarily have the best relationship with the players he needed to have the best relationships with, especially Devontae Adams. And so, by just bringing in Antonio Pierce, that whole cultural shift brings in. And the work he's already done is highly impressive for someone who really hasn't had that much experience as an NFL head coach. He brought in Christian Wilkins to add to the defense, add to that dominant defensive front alongside Max Crosby. And I really think that this team is just a couple years away from contention, but that being said, it's not this year. And I look at the QB position as the main reason why. I think Aiden O'Connell was a huge part of what Antonio Pierce did in terms of, realizing that he may have been the best option outside of, Jimmy Garoppolo, who was injured at the time, so he really had no choice, and Brian Hoyer. I think that this is someone who isn't just a bridge option. An experiment at best, but someone who's a bridge option at the very worst. And so that's why I can't really invest in this team. And I think that Antonio Pierce's philosophies are going to take a while, but this is a very fantastic question to show the promise of the running back room for the Raiders from Tap to Learn High School Edition. What round does Zamir White go in? I actually had the pleasure of picking up Zamir White in my draft. And Zamir White, I think, is the most underrated running back in all of football. Gone is Josh Jacobs, so the role is completely his. And so, especially with Antonio Pierce's philosophies that I was alluding to before I responded to your question, I think that Zamir White's going to be a big part of the project, because Antonio Pierce did say that he wanted, on the offensive side of the ball, Josh Jacobs to be the difference maker for this offense, right? And so now that he's gone, Zamir White comes in. And I say, in terms of the round that he goes in, I could see him going as high as the third round and as low as the fifth round. And that might be interesting for a guy who may not have played as much snaps, but this year is his year. It's the year of running backs replacing older guys, whether they have left or just aging out of their teams. I think Zamir White is going to be one of those guys. And it's a fantastic question. So in terms of the round, if you're looking at him in fantasy prospects, I would say 3 to 5. You definitely don't want to wait for him to fall to the other round. You want to go out there, be people to say like, why were you picking him? And then he will shock you all. Where did you pick him? It says tap to learn. I believe I picked him actually in the 5th round. I would have to go back through my fantasy football draft, but I did pick him kind of in the mid-round where, I had already gotten 2 solid receivers in St. Brown and Garrett Wilson, and I was trying to build my running backs. I already drafted, I believe, Jameis Cook and DeAndre Swift before him, so it would have been around the 6th to 7th round. Let's just go to show that in any round, at any given time, you can find that hidden gem who other people might not be aware of, and that's when you pounce. And so that's a fantastic question to talk about the value of someone like a Zamir White, because I think this is the year of the new running backs, new faces, and new places era. So let's talk about that kind of running back narrative for the Las Vegas Raiders, because in terms of my betting, I had them at under 6.5 wins at plus 145. I still think that, because of this transition, because it was so drastic, it's going to take a while. But like you said, Zamir White is someone who I can't be sleeping on right now. He is going to be the name on everyone's lips at the end of the season in real life in fantasy. And I think that going forward, that's a huge step for them to at least solidify a crucial position on the offensive side of the ball that they can rely on being a difference maker. But right now, I'm not as high on the Raiders. I think that Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew at this point really are bridge options. They might be looking at the draft. They could, if they get a kind of mid-round, round 1 pick, look at a guy like Quinn Ewers, look at a guy like Shedeur Sanders. But at this current moment in time, that's where I see them. Let's not forget about the Denver Broncos and all the controversy surrounding them. And this is an interesting bet that I have. We're at plus 1,200. Sean Payton, the first coach to be fired. And let's be real here. I like that Sean Payton really liked Bo Nix out of college. But it's really confusing that he's investing so much into him, right? Because you think of Sean Payton, yeah, he's a QB whisperer. He got Drew Brees to be one of the better QBs in NFL history. Yeah, that whole thing between him and Russell Wilson didn't work out. But there's a lot of excitement around him about Nix. I don't believe that. Because as much as I want Bo Nix to succeed in the NFL, and I think he has all the traits to, and he's showing it in the preseason, I think there's just a rift between Sean Payton and the NFL's transition to a more modern style of play that Sean Payton hasn't fully wrapped his head around. And that could be the rift that sees Bo Nix not necessarily develop in ways people want him to, because I think that Bo Nix has a lot of promise, more promise than people did think, but not 12th round pick, hyping him up all off season, seeing him in the preseason, hyping him up again, kind of potential. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how Sean Payton and the Broncos season pans out, because I think this has been a very unhealthy relationship, starting off even with the whole Russell Wilson thing to now. It's very, very tense right now within the Denver Broncos fandom. That being said, I will give Bo Nix the benefit of the doubt, if anything, to save Sean Payton's job. Because, if anything, he has the talent, he has the moxie, he has Troy Franklin, his fellow college classmate, with him now in the NFL. He has Cortland Sutton, who I really like as well, fantastic catcher of the football. And so, this bet is really just going to come down to how Bo Nix kind of settles the tension between Sean Payton and his ideas. Because if Bo Nix invests in Sean Payton as much as Sean Payton has invested in him, this duo could work. But I'm still kind of apprehensive about the whole narrative surrounding the Sean Payton tenure in Denver. That'll just about do it for this segment. Coming up next, our final segment of the day, players who I think you should shy away from in fantasy. Players who I don't necessarily like, whether it be through their positional profile or where they stand in terms of tiers. We'll be right back to finish the show with that segment.